Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. Jeff, whose full name is Robert Jeffrey Pelly, was born on December 10, 1971, in Florence, Kentucky, to his parents Robert and Eva Pelly. As his name suggests, Jeff was named after his father. A few years later, Jeff became an older brother when the family welcomed a second child, a daughter named Jacques. In 1980, when Jeff was 9 years old, the Pelly family packed their bags and moved to Cape Coral, Florida. The reason for the move was a new job opportunity for Bob, Jeff's father, who had secured a position in computer programming at Landmark Bank. Now, Jeff and Jacques were raised in a religious household where going to church was a non-negotiable part of life. Bob, their father, was deeply committed to his faith and strict when it came to discipline. Crying wasn't allowed, as Bob believed it was a sign of weakness, a lesson he carried over from his own upbringing. However, the kids found comfort in their mother, Eva, who provided them with a space to show their emotions. But life took a heartbreaking turn in February 1985, when Eva passed away from skin cancer. She had refused treatment, and her health rapidly declined, eventually leaving her in a coma. For Jeff and Jacques, losing their mother was devastating, and their family's dynamic was forever changed. This was evident just a few months after Eva's death when Bob met a 27-year-old woman named Dawn Huber. Dawn had also experienced loss, having recently lost her significant other. The two were introduced through Bob's cousin, Katie, who was also Dawn's best friend. Their connection was quick, and within 9 months of Eva's passing, Bob and Dawn married in a small church ceremony in Ohio. However, this union wasn't exactly a happy occasion for everyone. Jeff and Jacques weren't even invited to the wedding, although Dawn's 3 daughters, 5-year-old Jessica, 4-year-old Janelle, and 2-year-old Jolene were present. By 1986, the newly blended family made a fresh start in the tiny town of Lakeville, Indiana. Bob believed he had been called to ministry and accepted a position at the Olive Branch United Brethren Church. This was no megachurch. It was a humble congregation of just 40 to 50 members. The job offered a modest salary of $1,300 a month, which, when adjusted for inflation, would be about $3,700 to $4,000 per month in today's money. What made the deal sweeter was the free housing, a parsonage provided by the church, situated conveniently right across the street. After moving, Jeff began attending La Ville Junior-Senior High School, where he quickly became well-liked by his peers. He also got a part-time job at McDonald's, further cementing his place in the community. Around this time, he started dating a girl named Darla, and from the outside, it seemed like life was finally settling down for the Pellys in their new town. However, just like any true crime story, life has also a way of taking a shocking turn when you least expect it. A few years later, something unimaginable happened that would forever change the Pelly family's story. On Sunday, April 30th, 1989, Dave, a member of the Olive Branch United Brethren Church, was responsible for making sure everyone showed up for the service on time. At around 9:15 in the morning, he noticed something unusual. Pastor Bob and his family were nowhere to be found. Bob, who ran the church, was always there before 9. This was highly out of character for him. Around the same time, an 11-year-old girl named Stephanie, who was friends with the Pelly children, went over to the family's parsonage. This was a regular Sunday routine for her, but when she got to the back door of the garage, she was surprised to find it locked. Thinking something was odd, she tried the sliding glass door at the back, but that was locked too. Confused, Stephanie ran back to the church, thinking she had simply missed them. She told her father, Henry, about what happened, and together with Dave, they started wondering if the Pelly family might have just overslept. By 9:30, Dave asked a young church member to step in and lead the service while he tried to figure out where Pastor Bob was. He walked over to the Pelly's parsonage and knocked on both the front and back doors, but there was no answer. All the blinds were drawn and the curtains were shut tight, leaving Dave unable to see anything inside. Feeling uneasy, he returned to the church and sat in the back row, but something didn't sit right with him. Minutes later, he and another church member decided to try a spare key to gain access to the house. Unfortunately, the key didn't fit. Just then, Lydia Easterday, another church member, saw them struggling and offered them another key, one belonging to her husband, a staff member of the church. Dave tried the back door first, but it didn't work. He then moved to the front door, and to his relief, the key turned, and what he saw in that hallway would haunt him forever. The first thing he noticed was Bob's eyeglasses lying on the carpet. As he stepped closer to the glasses, he looked to his left and froze. There on the floor was Bob, face down in a pool of blood. Panic set in. Dave rushed to the back door, letting the other church members inside. He told them to call 911 immediately. As he continued to survey the house, he spotted the stairs leading down to the basement. He peered down and saw 2 small feet clad in white socks. His heart sank. He knew it was one of the children. The dim lighting made it hard to see, but the unmistakable feeling of dread overtook him. Soon, paramedics arrived. Dave quickly told them not to touch anything, as he suspected a murder had taken place. They turned on the light, and the scene would soon reveal a chilling truth. The Sunday after prom night in April 1989, parishioners with Lakeville's Olive Branch Church found their minister and his family dead on the floor of the church parsonage. Reverend Robert Pelly was found with 2 bullet holes in his body. His wife, Dawn, was found entwined with the bodies of her 2 young daughters, Janelle, 8, and Jolene, 6. This tragedy was truly horrific, and as you might recall, there were 7 members of the Pelly family. So with 4 of them found dead, the search for the remaining 3 children was on. It turns out, though, that 3 of the children weren't even home that morning. Jessica, the 9-year-old daughter of Dawn, had spent the night at a friend's house. When her friend's mother drove her back to the parsonage that morning, they arrived to see yellow caution tape surrounding their home. Jessica immediately sensed something was terribly wrong, and her worst fears were confirmed when she learned what had happened to her family. But there was still the question of where Pastor Bob's other 2 children were. Jacques, aged 14, was about an hour and a half away at Huntington College, visiting friends from a church camp. The situation surrounding Jacques' return was strange. A bishop from their church came to pick her up, but he didn't tell her anything about the tragedy that had just unfolded at home. Jacques was completely blindsided when she arrived home and learned of the devastating news. Jeff, the 17-year-old son of Pastor Bob, was also nowhere to be found. Detectives later learned he had been at Six Flags Great America, a theme park in Gurnee, Illinois. They pieced this together from Jessica, who mentioned it during the investigation. Now, tracking Jeff down wasn't as difficult as it seemed, though. He and his girlfriend Darla, along with a group of friends, had spent the day at the park. While standing in line for a ride, Jeff started to feel something wasn't quite right. It was a nagging sensation, one that he couldn't explain, but he couldn't shake it. He turned to Darla and confided in her, saying he thought something bad had happened, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Darla tried to dismiss his concerns, but Jeff's uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Before long, the police arrived at Six Flags, and they separated Jeff and Darla from their friends. They began to interview everyone about Jeff's whereabouts the night before, trying to piece together his movements. Jeff was interrogated right after this with his grandparents, and there's actually a clip of him being questioned. Was there anybody in the family you really didn't get along with? How about your stepmother? We didn't get along real well. I mean, we talked hi-bye type thing, but we never really talked to each other or anything. I mean, I didn't hate her or anything, but we tolerated each other. And how about your stepsisters? Which ones? All 3 of them? What about them? Did you get along with them? Oh, I got along with the girls great. I just love the girls. Did you and your dad get in any arguments Saturday? No, we had a real good day Saturday. We got along real well. What do you mean, you and your dad had a real good day? Saturday, we didn't argue at all. He said that I'd been doing a pretty good job of shaping up and everything. So do you know who killed your mother and father? Or your father and... No, I really don't. I don't know who would want to. Did you have anything to do with it? No, I didn't. Me and my father didn't get along sometimes. Sometimes I'd be really upset with him, but we always worked things out. As you can tell from the clip, the tension in the air was palpable. Right from the start, the police were cautious around Jeff, and their suspicion was undeniable. It was clear to them that something wasn't adding up, and they began to focus their attention on him. The reason for their suspicion? According to the investigators, Jeff's relationship with his family was anything but simple. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As it turns out, when Bob and Dawn married, Bob had hoped that Jeff and Jacques, his children from his first marriage, would accept Dawn as their new mother. But that was a lot to ask, especially since their real mother had passed away less than a year earlier. For Jeff and Jacques, moving on from their mother was impossible. They couldn't just forget her, and that resistance created a rift in the family that would only deepen over time. To make matters worse, Jeff and Jacques didn't agree with the way Dawn was raising her daughters. The differences in parenting styles caused friction at home, and Jeff, in particular, was growing more distant from his father and the new family dynamics. According to their neighbors, Jeff had become something of an outcast within his own family. He didn't fit in, and it seemed like he was always on the outside looking in. But that wasn't all. 6 weeks before the tragic events, Jeff found himself in serious trouble. He was arrested for stealing CDs and cash from a neighbor named John. The crime itself was bad enough, but the aftermath was even more telling. John chose not to press charges, but instead, they worked out a deal. This, however, didn't sit well with Bob. His anger was palpable, and as a form of punishment, Bob decided that Jeff wouldn't be allowed to attend prom. That was a big deal for a 17-year-old, and it was a blow to Jeff's social life. Bob didn't stop there. He openly shared Jeff's behavior problems with others at church, further isolating Jeff from the rest of the community. It was clear that Bob was frustrated with his son, and this tension only seemed to escalate. To add insult to injury, Bob even took matters into his own hands by removing some of Jeff's belongings from his car, including his car keys. The car in question was a 1984 silver Ford Mustang, a flashy, attention-grabbing vehicle that was hard to miss. By taking the keys, Bob essentially grounded Jeff, restricting his freedom even more. With all these factors at play, the police's suspicion of Jeff only grew stronger. They couldn't help but wonder if his frustration and anger had led him to do something unforgivable. And after that tense interview, they began to focus their attention entirely on him, trying to find any clue that would tie him to the crime. But here's where things start to get tricky. There are a lot of discrepancies and oddities in this case that really make you question whether Jeff was actually involved. Let's start with the first major contradiction. Jeff wasn't originally allowed to attend prom, a decision Bob had made as punishment for his previous transgressions. But then, surprisingly, Bob had a change of heart and allowed Jeff to go. According to both Jeff and his sister Jacques, Bob could be harsh when doling out punishments. However, once Bob had cooled down, he would often reduce the severity of his punishments, and this instance was no different. Jeff's prom night was not a typical rebellious teenager's outing, though, and that's where things began to get murky. At the crime scene, detectives discovered some curious items. Among the usual evidence, things like carpet fibers, walls, and bullet fragments, was something far more intriguing. A set of keys was found in a trash barrel outside the house, but it wasn't just any set of keys. Attached to them was a heart-shaped locket, and inside the locket was a photo of a man and a woman. Strangely, the investigators paid little attention to this, and they didn't even photograph the item for evidence. What could this locket mean? Who were the people in the photo? These questions were left unanswered, adding to the growing list of oddities. Other peculiarities emerged as well. On Jeff's bed, they discovered a photo book filled with pictures of his life from the first 7 years. At first, this seemed like a normal childhood album, but as time went on, it became an odd clue. It was as though Jeff had been looking back on his early memories, particularly when his mom was still alive and his dad wasn't remarried. Could this have stirred up intense emotions that led to the violence? The police also found a load of laundry in the house, freshly washed that same day, and it only contained Jeff's clothes. This raised suspicions. Was Jeff trying to cover up something? Some speculated that he might have been revisiting his memories when he lost control, perhaps in a fit of rage, and murdered his family before quickly cleaning up. But there was something much more puzzling that wasn't found at the crime scene. Despite the brutal killings, there was no sign of the weapon that caused all the destruction. There was number 20 gauge shotgun, no shell casings, and no indication of where the weapon had gone. The Pelly family had indeed owned a Mossberg 520 gauge shotgun, which Bob had purchased in December 1987. Bob traded a .44 caliber handgun and $90 to acquire the gun, which he had planned to give Jeff as a Christmas gift. But by the time the authorities arrived at the scene, the shotgun was missing. Even more strange was the fact that it wasn't included in the list of evidence, and no one could explain where it had gone. Keep this in mind, because this missing gun would become a key detail in the mystery later on. And to understand the timeline better, let's rewind to the day before the murders, on April 29, 1989. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Jeff worked a morning shift at McDonald's, and later that day his father, Bob, stopped by a gun store owned by Steve Diller. Bob didn't buy anything, but he spent some time talking with the owner. Afterward, he picked Jeff up from work, and they headed home to the parsonage. It was well known that Bob had recently picked up a hobby, photography. On that particular day, he had scheduled a photo session with several couples, a task he was excited about. Eyewitness accounts would later place Bob at the parsonage before the tragic events unfolded. The window of time in which the family was likely killed was incredibly short, only about 15 minutes, between 5:10 and 5:25 in the evening. A couple, Kim and David, were some of the last people to see the family alive. They had just finished taking photos with Bob and were leaving the house around 5 o'clock. Another man, Matt Miller, drove by the parsonage at 5:15 and noticed Jeff's Mustang still parked in the driveway. However, when Kim and David passed by again at 5:30, the scene had dramatically changed. Jeff's car was gone, and the family was nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, another couple, Crystal and her date, had a scheduled photo session with Bob and his daughters at Crystal's house. But when Bob and the girls didn't show up at the agreed time, Crystal grew concerned. She decided to go over to the parsonage herself. When she arrived with her date, they knocked on the doors, but no one answered. All the cars were parked in the driveway, except for Jeff's Mustang, which was missing. Based on these accounts, it seemed clear that Jeff's car was gone by 5:30 p.m., which would have been after the murders had occurred. However, some eyewitness accounts didn't quite match up. Kurt Schaefer, a friend of Jeff's and his cousin Ken, saw Jeff leave the parsonage between 4:45 and 5 o'clock. Kurt even recognized the distinct sound of Jeff's Mustang. Lewis, another neighbor, also saw Bob around 5 o'clock, talking to a man in a black pickup truck. Bob was holding a shovel, and although Lewis waved at him, he seemed distracted. Who was this man in the black truck? No one knew. But perhaps the most crucial sighting came from Dennis, a gas station clerk. Dennis was working at an Amaco station, just 6 minutes from the parsonage. At 5:17 in the evening, he saw Jeff pull in with his Mustang. Jeff was under the hood of his car, wearing a black Hawaiian shirt and blue jeans. Dennis remembered the time clearly because his shift was supposed to end at 5, but his replacement was late. At 5:20, Jeff entered the store and used the phone to call his girlfriend, Darla. He told her his car was idling too high and that he was running late. After the call, Jeff returned outside to continue working on the car. By 5:37, Jeff left the gas station and Dennis clocked out for the day. From these accounts, if the Pelly family was indeed murdered between 5:10 and 5:25 p.m., it seemed clear that Jeff had no involvement. Moving on, Jeff later went to his friend Lynette Greer's house around 5:45 p.m., a visit confirmed by his girlfriend, Darla. The two, along with Lynette and her date, went to the Emporium restaurant at 6:15 p.m. to meet more friends. At the restaurant, everyone said Jeff appeared perfectly normal, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the evening like any teenager. Later that night, Jeff attended prom and afterward went bowling. Witnesses at both events described him as calm and collected, seemingly unaffected by the horrific events that had occurred just hours before, if he were indeed involved. He spent the night at a friend's house and went to Six Flags the next morning, carrying on as though nothing had happened. The police questioned everyone who had been with him that day, but no evidence connected him to the murders. His whereabouts were accounted for, and no clues tied him to the crime. As a result, the case went cold, and attention shifted away from Jeff. Over the years, the surviving children, including Jeff, grew up. He and his girlfriend went off to college, while his sisters went to live with their grandparents and in foster care. Unfortunately, Jeff's relationship didn't work out, and he eventually moved back to Lakeville. However, his return to his hometown was anything but easy. Since the murders, most people still viewed him with suspicion, pointing fingers at him as the prime suspect. The constant whispers and judgment weighed heavily on him, and as a result, Jeff decided to leave Lakeville behind for a fresh start. Seeking a new beginning, Jeff relocated to Fort Myers, Florida, where he started working in the credit bureau business owned by a longtime family friend, Philip Hawley. The Hawley family welcomed him as one of their own, and Jeff eventually married Philip's niece, Kim. It seemed like life was moving forward for Jeff, and for a while, things appeared to settle down. However, the shadow of the past was never far behind. Years after the tragic deaths of his family, Jeff and his sisters were each left inheritance money from their parents' estate. Jeff was set to inherit $48,000, while his sisters would receive $65,000 each. But there was a catch. They couldn't access the funds until they turned 23. Desperate for the money, Jeff became fixated on getting his hands on it sooner, and he came up with a plan. He told a story about having skin cancer and needing surgery. To make it seem real, he even forged medical papers. But his plan didn't work. The names on the documents didn't match the hospital staff, and it became clear he was lying. The FBI, who had been investigating the Pelly family case, got involved. They tracked Jeff down for trying to deceive them. In the end, Jeff was charged with wire fraud. He didn't go to prison, but he was sentenced to probation. The charge was a lighter one, but it still made his reputation even worse. After all the trouble with the fraud charges, Jeff shifted his focus to something else. Computers. He managed to land a job as an international consultant for the well-known company, IBM. Things seemed to take a turn for the better. He and his wife Kim had a son and moved to Dade City, Florida. They bought a beautiful house that was worth around $500,000. For a while, it seemed like Jeff was finally rebuilding his life. However, things weren't as perfect as they appeared on the surface. In 1997, Jeff and Kim filed for divorce, though they later reconciled and got back together. Despite all this, the shadow of the Pelly family murders still followed Jeff wherever he went, leaving him with a tarnished reputation that wouldn't go away. By the year 2000, the county prosecutor in Lakeville had changed. A new prosecutor named Chris Toth took over. He was determined to reopen cold cases, hoping to bring justice to victims like the Pelly family. He put together a fresh team of investigators and assigned Detective Craig Whitfield to take charge of the case. Craig's first step was to track down Jeff's two surviving sisters, Jack and Jessica. Jessica, the only surviving child of Dawn, who now goes by the name Jessie, had been disconnected from the rest of the family for years. She had spent a lot of time in foster care and struggled with substance abuse. By the time Craig interviewed her, Jessie had 2 children of her own, and she wasn't really in touch with her siblings anymore. During their conversation, Jessie revealed something shocking. She had once believed her father, Bob, was responsible for the murders. But as she got older, she found out that Jeff was actually being looked at as the prime suspect. Jessie remembered an unsettling conversation she had with Jeff when she was just 15 years old, 6 years after the murders. Jeff invited her to visit him and his new wife in Florida, and while she was there, he asked her, "Who do you think did it?" Jessie, still thinking it was their father, replied, "Your dad." To her surprise, Jeff simply said, "Okay." At the time, Jessie didn't think much of it, but looking back, she realized that Jeff might have asked that question because he was worried she might suspect him. After that, Craig interviewed Jack, but she came with a lawyer by her side, worried that her words might be twisted or misinterpreted. Jack was becoming more convinced that Jeff was the only possible suspect. The detectives were desperate to find solid proof to link him to the murders, so they started focusing on the laundry found at the crime scene. According to Craig Whitfield, the lead investigator on the case, he explained that a dark and pink striped shirt, a pair of blue jeans, and 2 white socks were found packed inside an Anna's Finer Foods bag. Inside one of the pockets of the jeans, the FBI discovered 34 coins and $1, which added up to a total of $1.50, along with a receipt from Anna's grocery store. Craig believed that the jeans being found in the washer was suspicious and could be probable cause to arrest Jeff. He thought that Jeff had likely left the money and receipt in the jeans because he was distracted and in a rush to take them off, forgetting they were there. However, a pair of blue jeans was never found in the washing machine, only a shirt and socks. In fact, not a single detective or officer involved in the case ever said they personally handled a pair of blue jeans. Jeff was wearing blue jeans when he went to Lynette's house before prom, so it was strange that they weren't found. Another issue raised was that no officer ever went to Anna's grocery to confirm whether Jeff had been there. No one came forward to say they had personally seen him there. It seemed likely that the jeans were never washed and were not found in the washing machine with the shirt and socks. Instead, Jeff's clothes that were found in the back of his Mustang, including a Hawaiian shirt, may have been mixed with the other evidence. Craig then wrote up a probable cause statement for Jeff's arrest, and the newly elected prosecutor approved the warrant on August 10, 2002. 13 years after Jeff's family was brutally taken from this world, he was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Craig, accompanied by a SWAT team, went to surround Jeff's house, but he wasn't home. Jeff, now 30 years old, was in Los Angeles after returning from a work trip to Australia. While at the airport, customs detained him because a warrant for his arrest had been issued. Jeff was now going to fight a battle in court, and his apparent motive was that he wasn't allowed to go to prom. Jeff's sister Jacques and his wife Kim found a defense attorney named Alan Baum. Alan had never heard of the case before, but he agreed to take on Jeff's defense. His first move was to try to get Jeff bond, but this wasn't successful because Jeff was considered a flight risk. From 2003 to 2006, there were multiple delays in the trial. Alan kept trying to get the case thrown out, arguing that Jeff's right to a speedy trial had been violated. Jeff was eventually released on bond for most of 2005. In 2006, it was finally time for the trial. The lead prosecutor, Frank Schaefer, argued that Jeff was responsible for the murders, even though there was almost no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Alan, on the other hand, argued that the police investigation had been flawed and they had focused too much on Jeff without considering other possibilities. Both of Jeff's remaining siblings, Jacques and Jesse, took the stand, and they had different things to say. Jessie testified that she had seen the 20-gauge shotgun hanging in her parents' bedroom before she left for her sleepover, but Jacques said that the shotgun had been removed the year before, along with all other firearms in the house. Jeff had mentioned this during his police interrogation as well, explaining that their father, Bob, decided to get rid of the firearms in the house because he didn't think Jeff was safe around them. Bob had given the guns to a man named Thomas Kebb. Thomas had stored a bag containing the shotgun, a rifle, and a pistol at his in-laws' house in their basement. The strange part was that investigators never spoke to Thomas or asked for the guns. Alan, the defense attorney, chose not to use Thomas as a witness because he believed that Jeff's mental state during that time might have influenced the jury's decision. On the other hand, the prosecution didn't want to call Thomas because they feared it would weaken their case against Jeff. Additionally, Jessie testified that her mom told her Jeff was going to Six Flags Great America, which Alan believed could raise doubts about Jeff's involvement, as it seemed like he had permission to go to prom. So why would he kill his family? Additionally, remember Dave, the man who first discovered the crime scene? Initially, he said the blood at the scene was still wet, implying the deaths had happened not long before. But when Dave testified in 2006, he switched his story, saying the blood was actually dry. There were also wet washcloths found nearby, and Alan, Jeff's lawyer, brought in an expert to show that washcloths would have been dry after about 12 hours. However, because the experiments were conducted in Arizona, the court didn't accept the results. Even more suspicious, no blood traces were found on Jeff's jeans, and Alan argued that Jeff wouldn't have had enough time to carry out the crime in under 15 minutes. After all, Jeff was just 17 years old at the time. Most teens wouldn't have been able to clean up a crime scene that quickly, especially since, according to everyone who knew him, Jeff didn't act strangely after those minutes. Another piece of strange evidence came from Bob's stomach, where they found popcorn kernels. Jacques, Jeff's biological sister, testified that Bob had a habit of eating popcorn every night between 7 and 8 p.m., usually after he put the girls to bed. In fact, a bowl of popcorn was found on Bob's desk, suggesting he had time to make and eat it before the crime took place. There were also 2 different types of shotgun shells found at the scene, plastic and paper, leading Alan to suggest that either 2 shooters or 2 different shotguns were involved. On top of that, the Mossberg 500 shotgun found in the Pelly house could only hold 5 rounds, but 6 shots were fired, casting more doubt on Jeff being the sole perpetrator. Now, Jeff never took the stand in his defense, as his lawyers believed it would be too risky. On July 22, 2006, he was convicted on all charges, and on October 17, he was sentenced to 160 years in prison. Some, like Jeff's stepsister Jessie, felt relieved by the conviction, but the story didn't end there. A new lawyer, Francis Watson, has been tirelessly working to prove that Jeff was wrongfully convicted. Watson has uncovered evidence that Jeff's original lawyer, Alan, didn't do his job properly during the trial. He believes the prosecution lied about the jeans, claiming they had been washed when they weren't, and that the lack of blood on Jeff supports his innocence. Watson also argues that Jeff's right to a speedy trial was violated, adding another layer to the case. A major new twist in the case involves Bob's connection to a man named Philip Hawley, who also had ties to Jeff when he left Lakeville. In fact, Philip may be the reason Bob and his family were tragically killed. Bob worked at Landmark Bank in Florida and had a close working relationship with Philip, who was Bob's supervisor. Philip was deeply involved in handling large financial transactions at the bank, And it turns out, Bob discovered some serious financial fraud happening among his closest friends. This revelation left Bob terrified for his life. Pastor Michael Ross testified that Bob sought him out for advice about his fears, telling him he was worried for the safety of his family. Jacques Pelly, Bob's daughter, also remembered how her father's paranoia grew during this time. Things took a strange turn when a woman named Toni Beeler, who worked at United Church Directories, came forward. She reported that Bob had confided in her, expressing fears that people were after him. Sadly, this crucial testimony was never shared in the trial, because incredibly, the recordings of her interview with investigators were mysteriously lost. Adding to the intrigue, a man named Eric Dawson, who was connected to the same bank and financial dealings, was murdered in a manner very similar to Bob's. Eric had become friends with Philip Hawley, and after his disappearance, it was discovered that Philip had forged documents and engaged in various fraudulent activities, including misrepresenting financial transactions. Eric's body was found months after his disappearance, and authorities eventually uncovered a complex web of financial crimes tied to Philip and his family. Despite an extensive investigation, Philip was only convicted of forgery and theft, while his family members received little to no punishment. Even more suspicious was the fact that Philip Hawley was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy linked to a man named Harry Stewart, who was later exposed as a non-existent person. Bob Pelly had worked with Philip during this time, which raises serious questions about why Phil would have been the beneficiary of such a policy. This case is filled with many unanswered questions. Why were the guns never found? Why was Jeff not arrested? Why was Jeff not allowed to testify in his own defense? Could there have been multiple people involved in the crime? And why are there inconsistencies in the evidence, such as the claims about the washed jeans and missing shotguns? The new lawyer working on Jeff's case has uncovered significant flaws in the original investigation, suggesting that Jeff might have been wrongfully convicted. In 2024, despite all this new evidence and a push for a new trial, Jeff was denied for the fourth time. St. Joseph County Judge Stephanie Steele ruled that Jeff did not meet the burden of proof needed for a new trial. The judge has denied Jeff Pelly's petition for a retrial. Pelly was convicted of killing his father, stepmother, and 2 stepsisters in Lakeville in 1989, so he could attend crime-related activities. A 3-day hearing was held in March of 2022 to give Pelly's legal team a chance to present new evidence in the case. When you think about it, if Jeff really were the killer, he would have to be one seriously skilled assassin. Imagine the level of expertise required for a 17-year-old boy to take out 2 adults and 2 children, clean up, and still have time to act like nothing happened, all within 15 minutes. And to top it off, he went to prom that evening, laughing and having fun with friends. The next morning, he was back at the park, seemingly unaffected. This case is incredibly wild and raises more questions than answers. It doesn't add up when you really break it down. Case 2. The story begins with the name Nick Hatchaney, a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, located in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Bainbridge Island is a small, peaceful town where the community is tightly knit, and the church plays an important role in the residents' spiritual lives. Nick was described as a charming man with a friendly smile, a good listener who often gave morally grounded advice. With his eloquence, enthusiasm, and dedication to his work, Nick quickly became one of the most beloved young pastors in the community. He not only guided the youth in the congregation, but also built close relationships with many families in the area, creating the image of a respectable man devoted to his faith and with a promising future in the church. In 1990, Nick met Dawn Hatchaney, a beautiful, gentle woman with a deep religious devotion. Their married life was peaceful until the fall of 1997, when the church's prophet Sandy Glass made a terrifying prediction for Nick. She revealed that God had told her Nick's wife was about to die. However, instead of reacting with shock or fear, Nick quietly replied, "I know." On the morning of December 26th, right after Christmas, Nick went hunting with some friends. By 10 a.m., he returned home to find the house burnt down and numerous police officers on the scene. He received heartbreaking news his wife, Dawn, had died in the house fire. She was found in bed, so badly burned that she was unrecognizable. Police found propane tanks, an electric heater, and charred Christmas wrapping paper scattered throughout the bedroom. To the police, Nick explained that he had turned on the heater before leaving home that morning to go hunting, and believed the nearby wrapping paper may have ignited while he was away. Nick explained that the propane tanks, used for heating and cooking, were a Christmas gift. He had opened the night before and had not yet moved out of the bedroom. Nick also mentioned that Dawn had been feeling sick and was taking Benadryl, which might have made her sleep so deeply that she couldn't escape the fire. The autopsy report stated that Dawn had pulmonary edema or pleural effusion, which could result from suffocation or various other causes. The forensic pathologist concluded that Dawn suffocated when her larynx reflexively closed due to the sudden eruption of the intense fire. The pathologist partly based this conclusion on the fact that there was no initial suspicion of foul play. The initial police investigation concluded that the fire and Dawn's death were accidental. This incident left Nick completely devastated. He appeared heartbroken, despite having been forewarned about his wife's death. After Dawn's death, concerned for their grieving pastor, Nick's congregation rallied around him, ready to support him during what they believed was an incredibly difficult time. One pastor even suggested performing a resurrection ritual for Dawn through prayer, a practice the church had previously conducted in the belief that God's power could overcome death. However, Nick refused, saying he didn't want to prolong or rekindle Dawn's pain. A few days later, Dawn's death was officially ruled an accidental fire, and the police closed the case. Comforted by his congregation, Nick gradually recovered emotionally and quickly returned to work at the church. There, he began organizing marriage counseling sessions for couples in troubled relationships. However, everyone noticed Nick's extremely strange behavior during these counseling sessions. He showed particular interest in the wives, spending excessive time confiding in them, and offering no real solutions to mend the strained marriages. Gradually, Nick planted misleading ideas in the minds of these women about a spiritual connection between them and himself. He encouraged private conversations with the women, exploiting weaknesses in their marriages, and positioning himself as the only person who could understand and help them. Nick's teachings became increasingly twisted, particularly as he deliberately steered conversations towards sensitive topics, using religious rhetoric to justify his immoral actions. One of the couples who sought Nick's counseling was Sandy and her husband, the same Sandy who had once had a strange premonition about Dawn's death. Initially, both attended counseling sessions together, but gradually, Nick focused solely on Sandy. He spent hours talking with her on the phone and arranged private meetings outside the church. People around them started to feel uneasy when Sandy, a married woman, was spending more and more time with the young pastor. But whenever questioned, Nick always justified their relationship as being ordained by God. Concern about the relationship grew, prompting a fellow pastor to personally warn Sandy that Nick was manipulating her. However, instead of listening, Sandy became even more convinced that she and Nick had a spiritual bond no one else could understand. Yet Sandy alone wasn't enough to satisfy the young pastor's desires. Nick wanted more. Another couple, Annette and Craig Anderson, also approached Nick for advice on their troubled marriage. As before, Nick quickly targeted Annette. In a private session, he told her that sex is not just physical, but also part of spiritual cleansing and connection. Initially, Annette felt skeptical and hesitant, but gradually, under the persuasive words of the respected pastor, she began to believe that Nick was truly guiding her toward enlightenment. These meetings quickly turned into opportunities for Nick to satisfy his twisted desires. From then on, Nick and Annette secretly met at hotels, turning their marriage counseling into a prolonged affair that lasted until 1998. Annette, torn between guilt and obsession, decided to keep everything a secret. However, in April 2001, during a heated argument with her husband, she confessed everything. Craig, Annette's husband, was furious and immediately reported Nick to the church leaders. An emergency meeting was held, attended by Craig, Annette, and Sandy. Following the meeting, Sandy decided to hire a lawyer and directly reported the incident to the police. From there, the truth about Nick Hetchine, a man who wore the mask of a kind-hearted pastor, but was actually a manipulative predator, began to unfold. An extended investigation uncovered a far more horrifying truth than anyone had initially imagined. Nick Hetchine had not only engaged in affairs with Sandy and Annette, but also with numerous other women in the congregation. He exploited his position as a seemingly gentle, devout pastor to manipulate the trust of women who sought him out for comfort and spiritual guidance. With persuasive words, Nick convinced them that they weren't just helping him overcome the grief of losing his wife, they were part of some divine mission. He portrayed himself as a heartbroken man in need of healing, while his victims remained unaware that they had fallen into the cunning trap of a predator. Yet, this was still not the biggest shock. During the investigation, police uncovered a secret. Nick had not only seduced women in the church, he had also engaged in an immoral relationship with his own mother-in-law. After Dawn's death, her mother, Polly, was devastated. Grieving her daughter's tragic passing, she turned to her son-in-law, believing only the two of them could truly understand the immense loss. Nick used this as an opportunity to gradually manipulate Polly's emotions. He frequently visited her, offered comfort, and paid unusually close attention to even the smallest details of her life. Initially, their relationship consisted of late-night conversations and tearful embraces. But soon, Nick began crossing boundaries. He convinced Polly that they shared a special bond destined by God, claiming that they were both sorrowful souls who needed each other to heal. Eventually, they ended up in bed together. Under the guise of compassion and empathy, Nick slowly turned the relationship into a secretive and sinful affair. Members of the congregation began whispering about Nick's frequent visits to Polly's home at odd hours. But no one could have imagined that the pastor they once respected was capable of such a vile act. When the truth was revealed, the entire community was shaken. No one could believe that Nick had not only betrayed the congregation's trust, but had also shattered all moral boundaries by seducing his own mother-in-law. The Christ Community Church immediately expelled Nick and severed all ties with him. But this was only the beginning of the complete downfall of the twisted pastor. At the police station, Sandy admitted that she had been having an affair with Nick for several months before his wife's death. Even more shocking, Sandy revealed a horrifying secret that had been hidden for years. Nick was responsible for Dawn's death. According to Sandy's testimony, on the morning of Dawn Hetcheney's death, Nick had called her in a panicked state. His voice was trembling as he confessed, "I did it." But before Sandy could ask anything more, another call came in from a church member informing her about Dawn's tragic accident. When Sandy later resumed the conversation with Nick, he coldly repeated, "It's done. It's done." At the time, Sandy didn't ask further questions. Weeks later, when she finally confronted Nick, he confessed the chilling truth. According to Sandy's account, on that fateful night, Nick had drugged Dawn with a heavy dose of Benadryl, leaving her drowsy and unable to resist. He then placed a plastic bag over her head, ignoring her desperate struggles. The most horrifying detail was that Dawn had never lost consciousness. She was fully aware and witnessed her trusted husband kill her. After confirming his wife's death, Nick staged the scene to look like an accidental house fire. He stacked old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, placed propane tanks near the bed, and adjusted the heater in a way that could ignite the fire. Nick's goal was clear: to erase all evidence and convince the police that Dawn's death was a tragic accident. Nick's plan succeeded far beyond his expectations. The initial autopsy report found no suspicious signs. Although there was no soot or carbon monoxide in Dawn's lungs, evidence that she hadn't been breathing during the fire, her death was still ruled an accident. Investigators, influenced by the fact that she was the wife of a respected pastor, never suspected it could be a premeditated murder. Initially, the forensic pathologist dismissed the theory that Dawn had been incapacitated by a Benadryl overdose, believing the dosage wasn't enough to cause respiratory failure. He argued that even if she had been drowsy, she would have reacted to the heat of the fire and attempted to escape. Upon reviewing crime scene photos, investigators noticed a strange detail. Newspapers were stacked beneath Dawn's body. This was unusual, yet overlooked in the initial investigation. Although a firefighter had voiced concerns and mentioned it to the police, he had no authority to challenge the accidental death ruling. However, with new evidence in Sandy's confession, the case was reopened. On September 12, 2001, nearly 4 years after Dawn's death, Nick Hatcheen was finally arrested in the parking lot of a Kinko's store. An arrest warrant was issued, charging Nick with first-degree murder. At the police station, he confessed to the crime and explained his motives. Nick revealed that in the year leading up to the incident, his seemingly perfect marriage with Dawn had begun to fall apart. The couple frequently moved, living in houses they purchased, renovated, and sold. However, Dawn longed for a stable life instead of constantly moving. To meet her wishes, Nick decided to buy an old house in East Bremerton, intending to turn it into their permanent home. The costs of buying and renovating the house plunged them into significant debt. Their financial situation worsened as Nick pursued his ambitious dream of establishing a Christian youth camp. While Nick devoted himself to the project, Dawn believed it was an unrealistic dream since they could barely manage their daily expenses. Arguments increased, leaving both exhausted. Nick gradually became distant, spending more time at church or meeting with congregation members, instead of being with his wife. Over time, Nick began to see Dawn as an obstacle to the divine mission he was dedicated to pursuing. From there, he devised a plan to murder his own wife. Just days later, on September 17th, Nick officially stood trial. However, in court, he claimed that he was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by the church itself to ruin his reputation. Specifically, Nick accused church pastors of having cursed him, insisting that their influence was far darker and deeper than law enforcement could understand. However, as the trial progressed, prosecutors decided to elevate the charges. Initially charged with first-degree murder, Nick's charge was later modified to aggravated first-degree murder. This change was significant because the element of arson allowed prosecutors to seek life imprisonment without parole instead of the death penalty. In court, Nick's disturbing web of sexual relationships was also exposed. Witnesses testified one after another, including several women whom Nick had seduced, both those he had affairs with and congregation members who had attended counseling sessions led by him. The most shocking testimony came from the daughter of a church pastor. She revealed that Nick had manipulated her when she was still a teenager. They had engaged in sexual activities shortly after Dawn's death. Their relationship continued for several years until she eventually moved away. These shocking revelations painted a horrifying portrait of Nick, a manipulative predator who abused faith and power to prey on vulnerable women, hiding his true nature behind the mask of a dedicated pastor. Medical experts and forensic specialists also testified, emphasizing that Dawn's body provided undeniable evidence of Nick's crime. However, these signs had been overlooked in the initial investigation, partly because investigators were influenced by Nick's reputation as a respected pastor and never suspected foul play. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, at his sentencing on February 7, 2003, Nick stood before the court, facing Dawn's grieving friends and family, and fiercely claimed he had been cursed. At the same time, Nick expressed regret for his past actions. He claimed to be mourning Dawn's death and admitted that she deserved better treatment. However, those words could not change the truth. The court sentenced Nick Heshany to life in prison for his undeniable crimes. The case seemed closed, but in 2007, an appeal to the Washington State Supreme Court unexpectedly altered Nick's fate. The appeal argued that the aggravated first-degree murder charge related to arson was not appropriate given the true cause of Dawn's death. According to the defense, Dawn had not died in the fire, but had already been suffocated by Nick beforehand, meaning the arson element should not have been used to increase the severity of the charge. After much deliberation, the state Supreme Court ruled in Nick's favor, agreeing to modify the sentence. His life sentence was reduced to 26 years in prison, a shocking outcome for the victim's family. Nick's 26-year sentence remains controversial. Was justice truly served fairly? Nick's appeal and sentence reduction raised serious concerns. Does the legal system truly impose strict penalties on manipulative, premeditated murderers? Or are there still loopholes that criminals can exploit? The Nick Heshany case was not only a chilling crime, but also a stark reminder of the dangers of abusing power and exploiting religious authority for immoral purposes. Sadly, similar incidents continue to occur in various organizations where individuals in power are seen as beyond reproach and are less likely to face suspicion. Case 3. Tristan and Blake Barris were brothers, 14 and 13 years old, and were 2 of 6 siblings. Blake was the oldest and Tristan was the second oldest. They shared an interest in cars and motorcycles. Blake enjoyed playing football, making friends, and cheering people up when they felt down. He was said to have a big heart. He was diagnosed with ADHD and sometimes got into trouble with adults. Tristan had anxiety and was an occasional target for bullies. In spite of his hardships, he was kind and sweet to those he loved. When one of Tristan's friends was diagnosed with cancer, he dyed his hair a sunny yellow color to help fund their treatment. He would eventually be known for his colorful hair. With natural hair, you just look like every other person. Why have you got a bright yellow Mohican is a question I've never had to ask in all my years here, but today it's the one I'm asking of you. It turns out Tristan's new look is for charity. My friend is dying of bone cancer. I asked if I could dye my hair yellow for him. The boys lived with their mother Sarah in Sheffield, England, and attended school at the Firth Park Academy. Their home was on Gregg House Road in the Shire Green suburb. It was a council-style home with an overgrown, unmaintained front garden. Their community was relatively small, so many of the locals knew of Tristan and Blake, even if they didn't know them by their name. Employees of local shops said the boys were always smiling, polite, and sweet. Sarah told everyone that her children's father was dead. It's reported one of the younger children was convinced that their father died in World War II, despite it being 2019 at the time of our story. However, the father of Sarah's children was none other than her half-brother Brandon Mackin. For years they had a secret relationship. The eyes of outsiders and the children, Uncle Brandon was just a supportive family member. It's been noted that Brandon seemed like a doormat who would do anything, and I mean anything, that Sarah asked of him. Sarah was no stranger to British Family and Child Services. It's been reported that she herself was a victim of family violence and childhood SA. 4 of her 6 children had special needs, and Sarah wasn't always equipped to give them the aid that they needed. She reached out to social services for aid, but was constantly fearful her children would be taken away. Social workers often checked in on the children, but they never reported signs of mistreatment or neglect. Agents regarded Sarah as a good mother to her children. These agents did not suspect anything unusual about Sarah and Brandon, or thought that the children were in any danger, even though Sarah's brother Martin called social services because he was afraid for his nephew's safety when they were young. Martin was uneasy about his sister and half-brother for as long as he could remember. He said those two have been evil since birth. They are both as bad as each other. They are both murdering, evil psychopaths. I witnessed Brandon's violence towards Blake years ago, and I knew something wasn't right. I visited them when Tristan was still in his pushchair and Blake was only a toddler. He must have been 3 or 4. We were out walking when Brandon grabbed Blake's arm really roughly and dragged him across the floor. It was enough to know something wasn't right, so I called social services and asked them to look into it. In another instance, Martin said I had concerns, so I reported them to social services. It was 2009 or 2010 that I made complaints. It was 3 phone calls. I told them about the incident. I was told they would look into it, but I didn't hear back from them. I feel like I was ignored. Martin also recalled growing up with Sarah and Brandon. Their mother had 8 children in total with 4 different men. They were in the British foster care system for a short period, but they were all eventually returned to their mother. But their mother was far from responsible. Martin said they were constantly guests in the home getting drunk, stoned, or both. There weren't any house rules or regulations, so the children often had to fend for themselves. Sarah and Martin were close when they were younger. Martin remembers his sister as shy but protective, but whatever relationship they had gradually died when their older half-brother Brandon came into the picture. He said, once Sarah and Brandon got close, she changed. She became a bully. As soon as he came, there was a bond. They would always be together and were thick as thieves. Brandon once beat someone up at school for no reason, just to impress Sarah. He also touched on Brandon's behavior towards other people. He said Brandon would torment me. One day at the park, Brandon called me over, turned me upside down, and rammed me headfirst into the floor. He terrified me. He was violent and would punch people for no reason and get into fights. Sarah was his sidekick. They were always whispering together. When they were younger, Martin heard his other sister screaming. He found Sarah and Brandon trampling and stomping on small black and white mice. They were laughing about it. Martin tried to get them to stop, but he wasn't strong enough to stop them. Sarah and Brandon left when their fun ran out. Martin and his other sister stayed behind, where they cried over their dead mice. In another instance, Martin and Sarah were playing outside with some other kids. A girl they knew climbed up a tree. Sarah, unprovoked, followed the girl and pushed her as hard as she could. The girl fell and hit the ground hard, injuring her arm in the process. Sarah again laughed. Martin had already clocked that his sister wasn't normal, and that she was capable of extreme violence. He did his part in calling social services and expressing his concerns. Fortunately, his words fell on deaf ears. In interviews, Martin does not spend much time mourning the sister he once had. Instead, he thinks more on the person she chose to become. Her behavior, the way she'd act like animals for one. Finding a bird's nest, and she killed 2 birds just straight across with stones, and I was crying my eyes out, and she wasn't even asked. The mice that she had that she just stamped on wasn't normal behavior. I was in tears and she was just laughing. She's messed me up a little bit, and I feel numb at times as well, like guilty. I should have spoke more, or, you know what I mean, gone down and seen them more. Should have done something more, I could have picked up on something. You know what I mean? So yeah, I feel guilty, and I feel like I've let down as everyone else. Sarah was reported as saying the phrase, "I gave you life, I can take it away," to her children by people visiting her home. However, Sarah wasn't exaggerating. She would make good on those words. Tristan and Blake both began exhibiting troubling behavior. Sarah claimed that her two oldest had addictions to adult content. Blake at one point got behind the wheel of his aunt's car without permission and was getting aggressive with his younger siblings. In 2018, the household was assigned a social worker following some disturbing allegations against Blake. Details are vague, but it is reported that Blake was accused of some kind of inappropriate behavior towards another child. Blake would have been between 12 and 13 during this accusation. Social services sought out to nip this behavior in the bud. Blake worked closely with a social worker, and he was responsive to getting the treatment he needed. Sarah was advised to have an open-door policy. She found this difficult to maintain in her small house. As social workers continued working with the family, they may have detected something was wrong in the home. May 21st, 2019, social workers had a meeting with the children without Sarah present. She knew about this meeting and was incredibly anxious. The following day, she learned that her family would be under closer observation by social services. Sarah was questioned about the identity of the children's father and about potential essay within the home due to Blake's reported behavior. Sarah refused to answer these questions. She was described by social workers as defiant. Then, on May 23, 2019, Sarah answered a phone call. The person on the other line has not been named. Accused Tristan of inappropriate behavior against another child. This individual said they would go to the police the very next day. Sarah may have been considering extreme measures against her children as early as the 2018 allegations. She had reached out to her friends over texts for comfort and to vent. In one message, she said, "It's reported that in July of 2018, Sarah posted multiple images of Grim Reapers on her social media pages." She captioned one of the images with, in another post, she quoted the Stephen King novel Under the Dome. The combination of the new allegation, the looming presence of social workers, and the fear of being discovered for their disgusting relationship led Sarah and Brandon to go the scorched earth nuclear route, familicide. They had already made plans over the course of a week, so it's possible that the phone call tipped them over the edge. Sarah began to collect various medications from around the house in order to give them to her children. She had hoped that they would OD in their sleep, and that Sarah would remove herself from this earth the very next morning. Brandon would then alert the police upon his false discovery of the family's death. To Sarah and Brandon in their sick and twisted minds, death was a better, kinder fate than losing their children to social services. Sarah piled together various drugs from the home and forced her 4 older children to take them. The children protested taking the pills, but their mother forced them to swallow them. It's also reported she sent messages and made social media posts about an illness in her household. The medications made the children sick with OD symptoms. Sarah hoped that by the next morning, her children would already be cold and dead, but the drug cocktail thankfully was not lethal. Frantically trying to move forward, Sarah cluttered her search history with causes of death including drowning, strangulation, and suffocation. 5 in the morning, she called Brandon for help, took a taxi to the home on Gregg House Road. Tragically, despite surviving the poisoning attempt, Sarah and Brandon together strangled Tristan and Blake. It's reported Sarah used them from her bathrobe and Brandon used his bare hands. Tristan fought back at first and begged his mother to stop. "Mom is killing Tristan," Blake yelled to his younger siblings before Brandon descended upon him. The boys fell unconscious. Sarah and Brandon tied trash bags over their heads to make sure they were dead. Brandon then helped himself to an energy drink afterwards, while Sarah attempted to drown another one of her children in the bathtub. The child screamed in thrash and asked, "Why are you trying to kill us?" It's not reported why, but when Sarah couldn't drown her child, she assembled her remaining children into her bedroom and called the authorities on herself. It's possible the guilt or anxiety started to eat her alive and thankfully saved the lives of her other 4 children. Officers arrived at the scene between 7:30 and 7:45 in the morning. They asked about the well-being and the whereabouts of the 2 older children. Sarah said Tristan and Blake were visiting someone else. But when one of the surviving children looked at the officers and gestured towards their neck with their hand across their throat silently saying, "Dead," Sarah saw this and said, "Stop, don't say that." Officers found Tristan and Blake in their bunk beds. Trash bags were still over their heads. The police arrived before the younger siblings could be fatally harmed, but they still rushed all the children to the hospital. Sarah gave one of the officers a notebook. In her handwriting, the page she opened read, "Funeral arrangements." "Good afternoon. We're here on Gregg House Road here in Sheffield. A tragic scene of events. This morning at around 7:30, the emergency services responded to a property on this street. As a result of that, the Yorkshire Air Ambulance Service attended here, and a number of children were taken to hospital. Sadly, 2 children have since died and 4 children remain in hospital. As you can appreciate, this is a very early stage of our investigation. Our detectives are supporting the family. The family are aware of the circumstances, and our inquiries will continue to develop during the day. I think it's really important that I reassure the wider community that there is no wider risk. 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder and remain in police custody. Can you tell me what you think caused those children's injuries? I think at this moment in time it's too early to say. A post-mortem will take place. The investigation is at very early stages, and detectives are working closely with a number of different lines of inquiry. Our specialist family support officers are with the family at this moment in time. Have your officers had to use any protective equipment or clothing to go into the house? As part of our forensic examination, that will be routine, but in terms of that wider bit, no, not at this moment in time. Do you believe a weapon was used? At this moment in time, I'm not able to provide those further details. As you can appreciate, this is very much a live investigation, and it's important that I reassure the community and also that speculation. I'm aware of wider speculation regarding the use of weapons. At the moment, there is no wider risk to the community in Sheffield. Tristan and Blake were pronounced dead by medical professionals between 9 and 9:30 in the morning on May 24, 2019. Sarah only told medical examiners she tried to poison her children with medication, but Brandon confessed everything to the police. He said that he began strangling Blake because he got that feeling when you just want to strangle the life out of someone. Sarah and Brandon were arrested. The other 4 children were taken to the hospital. After they were deemed well enough, they were discharged that afternoon. In accordance with UK publishing laws, the other children's identities were not released as they were younger than 13 during the tragedy. The massive police presence outside the home drew the media's interest. They only knew that children had been harmed, and later, 2 children had died. First, the public speculated that there was a shooting within the home. The house was less than a mile from a school, the Hartley Brook Academy, so understandably, there were concerns for the young students' safety. But law enforcement assured the public the incident was not related to the Hartley Brook Academy. Aside from a traffic detour, the school operated as normal, only with the knowledge a medical aircraft had temporarily landed in their playground earlier that morning. Later in the day, the chief inspector gave an update to the community. We will remain in the area this afternoon and into the evening carrying out inquiries and providing reassurance. I appreciate the events of this morning have caused concern locally, but I'd like to reassure you that there is no wider risk of the community. We will be providing regular updates when we are able to. Martin, Sarah's brother, and the 2 boys' uncle learned about his nephew's passing through a link on Facebook. He said the following: "It felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my stomach. I instantly felt sick. I spoke to my mom, and she said Sarah and Brandon had been arrested. The next day, she told me they had been charged. I was disgusted. There are no words for them. Blake and Tristan were polite, kind-hearted lads. It's a tragic waste of life." Martin also criticized social services for their failure to act before it was too late. He said, "Social services have been aware of our family since before Sarah had kids. They don't seem to have done the job they could have done or should have done. That's what I'm struggling to understand. The main people to blame are Sarah and Brandon. Social services could have prevented it, could have stopped it. This will haunt us forever." In the wake of the sentencing, the police held the following press conference. "Ladies and gentlemen, today the judicial process has taken its course. The judge has made his decision on the outcomes for those that were responsible for the events on the 24th of May this year. A day that we remembered in memory of many people for all the wrong reasons. I'm not here, nor would you expect me to do so, to comment on those sentences, but I would like to say a few words. I'd firstly like to thank all those that have helped the investigating officers over these difficult last few months. I know this hasn't been easy for family members and loved ones, but you have been the hearts and minds of all the South Yorkshire Police family. Incidents like this are fortunately very rare. Sheffield is a place where we look after each other, we care for each other, and the community is at our heart. We continue to work with partners to ensure any of the young people affected by this incident will be given specialist support and provided the right direction as they move forward with their lives. On a final note, I would like to thank the press for their support in the reporting of this matter in sometimes difficult circumstances. Your support and understanding has been appreciated by the family and all. Thank you. My name is Edmund Talbot, and I work for the Crown Prosecution Service. This was an appalling crime in which 2 young lives were lost and a family was torn apart, leaving the community in shock. 2 of the surviving children witnessed their older siblings being attacked, and the trauma that all the children have experienced and will continue to experience is unimaginable. It is now paramount that surviving children are allowed to rebuild their lives in peace. The local community raised £3,000 for Tristan and Blake's funeral service, but funeral director Michael Fogg said he would pay out of his own pocket for the boys' burials. The money was split 4 ways and put into bank accounts for the surviving children. The 2 boys' love for cars and motorcycles inspired 300 local bikers to take part in the funeral procession. There were also 2 Lamborghinis. A white wooden bench outside Firth Park Academy was decorated with flowers, ribbons, and a plush animal toy in honor of Tristan and Blake. The school also provided therapeutic services to their students in the following months of the tragedy. The families within the community were deeply affected by the murders. Reporters with the Huffington Post interviewed some of residents in Sheffield. Those who knew the family personally were deep in mourning. 31-year-old mother Sam Parker said her daughter asked a question that no child should ever even think to ask. "Mommy, you won't kill or hurt me, will you?" She said it is sick that parents could do that to their own kids. It hits children particularly hard, and it makes them question everything. Even as an adult, it makes you question humanity and what people are capable of. Makes you want to keep your own children close to you and safe, and you realize you don't know what is going on behind closed doors. Members of the community that were familiar with Brandon said they thought he was friendly and never had the impression he could do something so heinous. The general feelings among everyone was a mixture of shock, anger, and mourning. Another resident said that social services were investigating Sarah's relationship with Brandon, and that sent Sarah past her tipping point, though the official statement from social services would say they didn't suspect a thing. Psychologist Amanda Gummer gave advice for families in the process of grieving such an event. She said not to brush off your children's fears, but to also not tell them sugar-coated lies. Bad things happen in the world, but you will do your job as a parent to keep them as safe from danger as you can. Moreover, talking through tough emotions and seeking help are key ways to heal from any traumatic event. She explained if you break your leg and don't treat it, it won't heal and you will always limp. In the same way, if you experience an emotional trauma, the sooner it is dealt with, the less long-term the impact. Sarah and Brandon pled guilty to conspiracy, murder, and attempted murder. Sarah cried when she was told of the possible life sentence she could face. Prosecutor told the court that one of the surviving older children expressed fears that they would become a violent criminal when they grew up because their mother and father were murderers. They said they missed their brothers. Of the accused, Prosecutor Mel told the courts, although clearly the defendants were motivated to prevent the loss of their children to the care of the local authority, this was combined with their fear of the authorities becoming aware of their unnatural relationship. Younger children, all under 3 years old, never called out for their mother or asked to see her. During and after the trial, they were given the care and support they needed to heal from this traumatic experience. They asked that their mother be locked away in prison for 300 years. The child who was nearly drowned was reported to have developed a fear of baths. Agents and practitioners testified in court that they had no reason to believe anything was amiss within the home, or that the relationship between Sarah and Brandon was anything but familial. In his defense of her, lawyer Brian Cox discussed Sarah's troubled upbringing and the damage it caused her. He said the defendant was desperate to prevent her children being taken into care. She couldn't cope with the prospect of them being removed. Before he read his judgment, Justice James Goss said both the children who survived were clearly aware of some of the terrifying events surrounding the deaths of their brothers and your attempt to drown one of them. The initial effect on them, as described by them, was frightening. Surprisingly, they are extremely upset and anxious. The statement from their social worker on their behalf describes their inevitable confusion, the effect of the loss of their brothers upon them, and the incredible emotional hardship of these events on the older children and of being separated. Inevitably, they will require a significant amount of support. The long-term consequences for them and the younger children as they grow older and become aware of what happened cannot be known. It's likely to be significant. Before this point, the press wasn't allowed to report on the incestuous relationship between Sarah and Brandon. After the sentencing, Justice Goss gave the press permission to report this fact once it was proven within the courts. Justice Jeremy Richardson, who presided over the sentencing, told the defendants before giving his verdict, "No words of mine can ever fully reflect the enormity of what you have both done. The crimes you have committed quite frankly speak for themselves. The murder of 2 children, the attempted murder of 4 children, and the overarching conspiracy to murder those children. I repeat, those crimes speak for themselves. I have little doubt that each of you will in due course be sentenced to several terms of life imprisonment." Sarah and Brandon were sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. One of Tristan and Blake's friends, Matthew Saunders, gave a statement outside the courthouse after the sentencing. He said, "Blake and Tristan were 2 beautiful, confident, and outgoing boys who both had a bright future ahead of them. They had so many friends, and they lit up any room they were in, especially Tristan, who loved to dye his hair bright colors. Daily life will never be the same again now. The boys have left behind younger siblings whose lives have been turned upside down. They adored their older brothers, and they looked up to them. The boys have also left behind close family friends and younger children who looked up to them, and who saw them on a regular basis. And this tragedy hasn't just affected those close to them, but the whole community too. A piece of all our hearts died on the 24th of May, 2019, which we will never get back. Blake and Tristan leave a huge empty void in our lives, and we did not get the chance to say goodbye. We are relieved justice has been served, but it should never have come to this. We would like to thank the emergency services who attended and did everything they possibly could to save Blake and Tristan. We cannot thank them enough. We would like to thank the family liaison officer DC Little for all her help and support over the last 6 months, and for making it that bit easier when we were struggling. We cannot put into words the pain and emptiness we feel, but we find some comfort in knowing Blake and Tristan will always be remembered, and how loved both boys were. Thank you. Following Sarah and Brandon's trials, a serious case review, or SRC, was conducted on Tristan and Blake's deaths. In Britain, SRCs are always conducted following the death of a child due to mistreatment. The report found that the agents and practitioners from social services saw Sarah as competent, caring, and capable, which conflicts with the measures taken in 2019 to deduce mistreatment in the home. Officially, social services could not have predicted this tragedy, but there were internal failings that undoubtedly endangered the children. The Shire greenhouse was abandoned for some time, and stood as a reminder for everyone of the tragedy within those walls. Though various people left flowers and balloons along the fence in memory of Tristan and Blake, the neighboring families called for the property to be demolished, and it finally was in February of 2021 by the new owners, a not-for-profit company called Sanctuary Housing. Their spokesperson said on the matter, "The decision has been taken as we believe it is the right option to help the community move forward, and because it will allow us to create a suitable memorial to the events that occurred. An open space will be created when the property is removed, and this space will include a memorial tree to provide a subtle reminder of the tragic events that occurred at the address." Case 4. Passion Unique Jeffrey was a vibrant young woman born on September 26, 2002. Her mother, Lakita Denson, as well as her other immediate and extended family, were closely involved in her life. She was always seen with a smile on her face, whether it was at work at the local CVS or visiting friends. Her family described her as full of energy, and how her eyes were alight every Christmas. She was short, standing barely at 5 feet. She was a bit of a makeup aficionado, always wanting to be presented well in public. A St. Petersburg, Florida native, she attended Benito Middle School before graduating from Northeast High with honors, a feat made even more difficult by the recent birth of her son, Talon Mosley. Talon was born on March 12, 2021, to Passion and father Thomas Mosley. He was the cute child who took after his father right from birth. He had brown hair, inquisitive large brown eyes. He was playful and friendly with everyone. He loved the Toy Story movies and action figures. His mother would often call to video chat with him on her breaks at work, leading him to borrow family members' phones to try to call her. He was truly a bundle of joy in the center of his mother's world. Thomas Mosley was Talon's father, but by at least some accounts, not heavily involved in the family's life. Passion's mother once referred to her as a single mom and was proud of how her daughter was thriving. Now Thomas was unemployed and had a minor criminal record, having once pled no contest to a charge of leaving the scene of a crash. David Mosley, his father, believed him to likely have some mental health issues that caused him to do things to harm himself as a teenager, but he was undiagnosed. Passion's sister, Jamia Falk, told the police that Passion had described Thomas as crazy before, saying he wanted things his own way. It was on Thomas's 21st birthday, March 29, 2023, that a horrible incident unfolded. On the morning of the 29th, Jamia received a video call from Passion and Talon. They were at the doctor's office due to Talon having been sick for a few days. They talked about Passion's plans for the day, with Passion telling her sister that they were going to go to the store to find a birthday cake, and then to a different store to look for a gift. Passion seemed off to her sister, but when she was asked about it, Passion said that with Talon being sick and not being able to sleep, that she was a bit irritated. He had also thrown a tantrum at the store. The afternoon birthday party went, by all accounts, fairly well, with the exception of Talon still not feeling well. He spent most of the party sleeping in Passion's room. It was a sunny, warm day in March. The party ended early with some family members leaving around 5 p.m. as Passion's younger brother had to get to track practice by 6. Passion's family had already given Thomas his birthday present. It was a paint set. However, shortly after leaving, Passion texted her mother that Thomas didn't want the paint set and that the family could use it. Her mother, Lakita, recalled that Thomas was wearing a hoodie, jogging pants, and Gucci brand slides. Her daughter was wearing a Hot Wheels t-shirt with Talon's name on it. The next day, Jamia expected to be watching Talon so that Passion could go work her regular shift. Jamia woke up late that morning, realizing that Passion hadn't brought Talon. She tried to call her, but didn't get an answer. She called her Lakita, also had not spoken to Passion that morning. Concerned, but not overly so, the two ladies went about their planned day. They asked Lakita's aunt if she could stop at Passion's apartment to check on her. Their first stop of the day was at a local laundromat. While there, they received a call from the aunt that Passion was not answering the door, and that, while she had checked with the apartment's front office to see if they could go inside, that they weren't allowed in. However, Passion's car was in the parking lot. So next, they called her work, who reported that they hadn't seen or heard from her either. Learning that, they decided to go to Thomas's house. Thomas lived with his parents, Renee and David Mosley, in St. Petersburg, along with a brother named Isaac. They thought maybe Passion and Talon had gone there after the party, but when Lakita and Jamia arrived there, Thomas's brother was sitting out front. When asked, he replied that he thought she was at work. Isaac then informed Lakita that when Thomas came back home after the party the night before, his arm was cut up badly enough to immediately take him to the hospital. Uncertain of what was going on, but still not overly concerned, Lakita returned to the laundromat and called the apartment complex, asking the front office if they could send someone to do a welfare check. The front office sent their maintenance man named Armando Daigas. He knocked first, then let himself into the apartment with a master key. He saw the bathroom door standing open with a woman laying on the ground. He later told investigators that he thought she had a gunshot wound to her head. Shocked and overwhelmed at what he had seen, Armando quickly looked for the child that Lakita had told him about, but he was unable to find little Talon. He subsequently left the apartment and called 911. I've been doing this job for 30 years now, and I say that in the 30 years I've been doing this, I found maybe 35, 40 people because I work with a lot of old people, and they've all been natural. This is the first one since I've been here in Florida that I found, and I've never seen a crime scene. Yeah, wow. What did you see when you went up there? Well, there's blood and bloody footprints all over the apartment. Yeah, I saw that. When I went to talk to the bedroom, because my concern was the kid and her safety, I said I saw the bathroom door was closed, so I pushed the bathroom door open. I said, she's laying on the floor face down with her shorts down past her buttocks, her blouse is up to her neck, and she has a hole about the size of a silver dollar on the left side of her skull, but between the ear and the skull, right about here. And you didn't see any child, right? No, as I was backing out, I tried to look around the apartment. I did walk into the room, looked around the side of the bed, and I backed out of the apartment. And as I was walking out, I tried to look behind the sofa, but I didn't want to, contaminate too much in there. So I walked right out the door, but I didn't see anything. I didn't hear any noise coming from the baby. They told me that the boyfriend is in the hospital. Yeah, well, we're trying to make contact with him and see what's going on. The neighbor downstairs stated that she heard them yelling and screaming. Are you a Hispanic male? Yes. We got blood coming off the trail, right in there on the sidewalk there. Okay. I see it. Yeah. All right. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to direct this officer to make sure he stays 10 to 12 with him. Okay. Hi, sir. Would you mind moving that? Well, we got to block off that blood area because you're cutting it off, but can you stay 10 to 12 with him? I'm gonna go get rescue and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. He's pronounced, so you want to get his information. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. He's pronounced. You already pronounced. Okay. What do you need to get? Just need his run number, name, and the time you pronounced. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Did you confirmed it? Confirmed. Do you have the run? 14 to 44, 305. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Go ahead. 305, 250. And your name, sir? B-O-I-C. Okay. Perfect. And it's apartment 36, right? Or 36? No, 16. 16? Building 36. Oh, building. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything else that you saw? Yeah, so she's face down. There's a lot of blood, and there's also a knife that's on the counter. Huh. Was there blood on the knife? Yes. Okay. Numerous injuries across the back and across the head. First responders arrived at the scene and pronounced 20-year-old Passion Jeffrey dead at 2:44 p.m. Soon, an Amber Alert was issued for 2-year-old Talone, who was described as being 2 feet tall, 30 pounds, having brown hair and brown eyes. He was last seen at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 29th. Passion had not been found until approximately 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 30th. This meant that any abductor had a long time to flee the area before police became involved. While police received several tips, none of them were found to be relevant. During this time, police began to question neighbors, friends, and family members. While most of the neighbors didn't recall seeing the family, one neighbor reported that she heard rough housing from Passion's apartment. She also reported hearing Talone cry and Passion yelling, "Stop it." This was sometime around 8:11 p.m. As far as anyone can tell, this is the last time anyone heard Passion or Talone. This is a lease agreement for the individual in that apartment. Okay, so we're just like verifying all that other information. Yeah, I got 2 Mosleys with me, the grandfather of the baby and the son of the grandfather. They're both here. Okay, but I don't know, they said that the baby should be in there. Did we search for a baby? No, we're holding the scene because we gotta make sure that the baby's okay. Let's talk to the lieutenant. Hey Lou, they're saying, it's this house here. They're saying that the grandfather's here with his son, and they said they came to do a welfare check, and the baby should be with the mother. So they don't know, did we search for a baby? Do we hear a baby crying or anything? No, we didn't hear a baby. Where's the maintenance man? The maintenance man's back here. I got his name. That's him. Yeah, we need to make sure he doesn't leave. Yeah, we need to hold on to him. Okay, I got his ID. Apparently, I think he lives in this gun complex. Stay with him, make sure he doesn't go anywhere. Okay, yeah, he got his golf cart here. Oh no, I walked around them, and I took my finger, and when I pushed the bathroom window, if the bathroom don't open, that's when I saw her on the ground. Did you hear a child? No, I tried to look for the kid. I tried to do a quick look to the bedroom and behind the sofa. So you didn't get to do anything, right? Okay. Was the front door open or did you open it? You had to open it with the key. Oh, I put the key in and turned it. Now if it was open, I don't know because I was but I didn't realize that I put my hand on it. We need you to stay with us for a little while. It's going to be a little while because we're going to have detectives and investigators coming in. If you can, I actually live on the property and stay with us. Like we don't want to lose you out of sight of you, because we're going to have to go over a lot of things. Yeah, the detectives need to talk to you, right? All right. Is it okay? I live right there. Is it all right if I go and talk to my wife? All right. Yeah, I don't want to have you go. All right. I'm assuming the door was locked because the guarantor was on property. Yeah. And she was banging on the door and the young lady from underneath. Yeah. The neighbor downstairs, the neighbor downstairs. She just actually texted the arm because she's been of the 3615. The person who lives right there. All right. Did you come in and do a wellness check with him? Oh, did you? Okay. I just need, you got identification on you and your supervisor. Okay. Amanda, what's a good phone number for you? What's his work number? Okay. You didn't touch the body or anything. No, I didn't touch the body. As soon as I looked at it, on the left-hand side, and her blouse is up to her neck. Now, was that related to the tons of footprints in there? Like bloody footprints? The caller that called last is that the boyfriend apparently was in the hospital. Yeah, I didn't hear that loud. Related to the grandfather, to the boyfriend because, to the not to her, but the way the pressure he gave me was like, he didn't even ask about the baby, he asked about it. He claims to be the grandfather, but never asked about the kid. Yeah, like they were expecting him almost. Her shirt had been pulled up to her neck, and her shorts and underwear were pulled down below her butt. Autopsy reports would later reveal that she had been stabbed over 100 times, many of them in her back. What's your name? Miss Jackson. Like I said, I'm Sergeant Martinez. There's a lot going on. Yeah, there's a lot going on right now, but we're gonna have to get some information from you. Okay, you wanna sit here? Yeah. You wanna have a seat for me? It just don't look right. It doesn't look right. Okay, but we're still gathering information. Okay, and we're still trying to figure out everything that's going on. So I don't want to give you information that isn't correct. Okay, y'all been in, they've been in, but they're still trying to figure out everything that's going on. Okay, we want to make sure that all the people that are there are the people that are supposed to be okay. Okay, spell your name for me. Laquita Laita. What's your last name? Denson. DNSON. Do you have a middle name? What's your middle name, ma'am? Ann. Now, who is it that you were reporting missing? My daughter, Passion Jeffrey, and her son, Talon Mosley. Jeffrey JFFREY? JFFREY. What's her date of birth? September 26th, 2001. Okay. And it's PSHUN. Okay. PSHUN? Yes. She just moved out here in February. She moved here in February? Yes. What apartment? 36 to 16. What did you last hear from her? Yesterday, about 5 in between, 1. I was on the phone with her between 1, and I was out here at their house about 4 to 30. And everybody was normal. The only thing, the baby was asleep in the room with the door closed up a little bit. Okay, so you last saw her at 4 to 30 yesterday, and everything seemed fine. And 4 to 30 up to 5 o'clock. Okay, so 4 to 30. Yes. Everything was okay. Yes. She wasn't concerned about anything? Nothing was upsetting her? She was just upset about the birthday, about his birthday, the baby daddy birthday. Does his baby daddy live with her? No, he was just, staying the night a couple times since March the 12th, since Talon just turned 2 years old. So he's not, what's his name, baby daddy? Thomas. Do you know Thomas's last name? Mosley, like the baby's. Is he a white or black male? He black with dreads. And he was there. Yeah. And when I left because I brought him, glasses, shades like you socks. It was his birthday. Right. And we ate ice cream with him. Do you know his birthday? Like what day his birthday was? The 29th. I don't know that. You're looking for me? He's 21. They're coming. He's 21. Okay. So you just turned 21? Yes, yesterday. Okay. What does your daughter look like? She's short, like you can see. And her hair is like this, black. Is that the same color? No, it's black. She's just top heavy and short like you, about 5 feet 1 inch. What was she last wearing? Brown tights and, birthday shirt, happy birthday tailoring or something like that. The orange and blue birthday shirt. I'm gonna let this officer take over real quick. He's gonna get some information. I've got her info, her phone number. This is the person she's trying to report. She last saw him between 4:30 and 5. She was upset about baby daddy birthday. That's baby daddy's name. Her birthday was her 29th. I started to get her description, to just get with her. I know mama. I'm gonna go get some info for you. I just heard Beth and the baby yesterday at 5 in the morning, because she was trying to buy Thomas something for his birthday. Yesterday was our baby daddy's birthday. Thomas, it was his birthday. Do you know if they were drinking or anything? I just know they were smoking. Smoking weed? Yeah, because I smoked with him yesterday, and while he opened up his gifts and, they were sitting there on the couch and didn't get home. We was eating ice cream and stuff, and I said, okay, I'm finna go because Trenton had to run truck. You gotta call your dad back because he worried. I've been having him on alert looking for them. I don't even drive. I'm trying to get that we just want to say, that Talon is a beautiful little boy, and he's really loving and caring, and he's just very sweet, and he'll smile and laugh at anybody. And there's Amber Alerts everywhere. And you guys have seen them. I have people all over the country calling me about the Amber Alerts. So I'm asking everybody, if somebody saw something, please speak up. So if you know something, say something. Help us get Talon back. Talon lost his mommy, so he needs his family right now. So we ask for your help, in finding him. Somebody knows. Please speak up. Somebody knows something. Somebody saw something. And Passion just, beautiful love to be with his family. We're missing Talon. We call him Tay-Tay. Tay-Tay. Yes. The glam. He answers to a lot of things. He's, very smart. He's always calling his mom on his cell phone. Yep. Always. He misses mom. They call each other all the time. She really loved Talon. Yeah, we don't know. She always was there for Talon. She calls on breaks. Yep. And, early in the morning. They FaceTime me early in the morning. Yeah. We're without words. We just are. We love Passion very much. And we love Talon. Very much. So we've lost Passion. So we ask you guys to help us to find Talon and to get him back. Please help. Please. Next, the police began to check places where Talon could possibly be. One of the first places was Ree's Private Daycare Services, which is a local home run daycare where Thomas's mother said that Talon had started going to. Desiree Rents, the caretaker, stated that Talon hadn't been there in a week due to him being sick. Next, they went to Thomas's family home to search for Talon. With the approval of Thomas's mother, the officers searched the house along with the backyard and a shed for the baby. No sign of the child's presence was found. Police also checked with Donna Johnson, another person who watched Talon sometimes, but she told the officers he hadn't been there since the previous year. Did you need a flashlight? What did you ask her? Did you need a flashlight? What did you ask her? Yeah, please. I appreciate you cooperating. You should keep that to yourself. No. Returning to the Mosley residence, Detectives Talbot and Bilbrey spoke to the family to try to get any more information from them that they could. They attempted to speak to Renee, but she didn't want to speak to them without her husband and another son present. Mosleys were told that Passion had been murdered. At this point, Renee asked the officers if she needed an attorney, which they thought was odd for her to ask. The officer further noted that the family appeared to be showing no emotion whatsoever, according to his account. Mrs. Mosley told the officers that Thomas had been staying with Passion for the last 3 weeks. On the night of the 29th, Thomas had come home and his father, David, had to let him into the house. Both parents stated that Thomas had multiple cuts on his arms. Thomas told his father that it was from a fight with a guy from Tampa, which David did not believe. David thought the wounds were possibly caused by Thomas himself, due to his son having previous mental health issues as a teenager. While his mother was trying to help him with his cuts, his father went to move Thomas's car into the yard. He had to place a bag over the seat of the vehicle, because there was so much blood in the car from the injuries. Isaac, who was another sibling of Thomas, drove him to the hospital. During this interview, Renee Mosley gave the officers a video from her doorbell camera that showed Thomas coming home at 9:03 p.m. on the night of the 29th. When the officers went to look at Thomas's car, they saw blood on the exterior of the passenger side and more blood inside the car. Using the vehicle exception to the standard warrant process, they got David Mosley to unlock the vehicle and looked inside to see if Talon was possibly in the car somewhere. While Talon was not in the car, they did find a large screen TV in the back seat. Detective Bilbrey called an officer at Passion's apartment to ask about the TV and found that there was no television in the living room. The officers then found a baby blanket covered in blood in the front passenger seat. As such, the vehicle was towed to the police department to be forensically processed. After a warrant was secured, officers searched the car and found an older-style flip phone. With news that Thomas had been taken to the hospital, officers went there to get any information he might have about Talon. There, the officers were told that Thomas had been taken upstairs to the operating room for a surgery on his hand and arms. Thomas was intubated and sedated at this point. An officer was placed in Thomas's room, so they could ask him questions as soon as he awoke. The officers then checked in with the emergency room for anything that Thomas may have brought with him. They were unable to find the clothing he came in with, and were told it was common for them to be cut off and disposed of. The morning of the 31st, police began asking family members to come to the station for interviews, and for any help they could offer in finding Talon. One of the first was Isaac Mosley, who had taken Thomas to the hospital the night before. He spoke glowingly of his nephew, how he enjoyed spending time with him, and how much his whole family loved him. He spoke of Thomas being antisocial, and that he didn't respond well to criticism. Isaac discussed how excited Thomas was when he found out that Passion was pregnant, and how she had spent a vast amount of time in the Mosley household. However, Thomas and Passion began to argue more frequently once she gave birth to Talon. When asked directly if he knew where Talon was, Isaac said, "To be honest, since all of this stuff has come out, the only person that would know that would be Thomas." He also said that his gut is telling him that Thomas knows where Talon is. Isaac then recounted what happened the night of the 29th from his perspective. He said he was in the living room when Thomas came in. Thomas was bleeding through a shirt that he had wrapped around his arm, and Isaac thought he had done it to himself. He asked Thomas what had happened multiple times, but didn't get a clear answer. When he removed the shirt, he saw that the cut was deep and still bleeding. He also noticed another cut on Thomas's hand. Isaac recalled that his brother was wearing a dry-fit shirt, sweatpants, and Gucci slides. He wrapped Thomas's arm and hand in a towel and drove him to the St. Anthony's Hospital. Isaac stayed with his brother, waiting for their parents to arrive. When he spoke to his mother, she said she was going to check on Passion before going to the hospital. She wanted to make sure that Thomas and Passion hadn't had a physical altercation. Renee called Passion, but didn't get an answer. However, Renee soon realized that she didn't know Passion's actual apartment number, so she left and headed to the hospital. The next day, Isaac received a call from Passion's mother asking if he had seen either Passion or Talon, because Passion wasn't answering her phone. Having noticed that Thomas didn't have his phone the night before, he searched Thomas's car for it. He saw a Paw Patrol blanket covered in blood that he knew was Talon's, but he didn't see a phone. Later that day, Thomas came out of surgery. When police spoke to him, they told Thomas that they were just trying to find Talon. Thomas responded by saying, "You need to be out there looking for my son, Cracker, instead of in here bothering me." He professed no knowledge of where Talon was and became belligerent, threatening, and cussing at the officers. At the same time, more officers were reviewing the footage from the hospital security system. They observed Thomas and his brother arriving at the hospital, and later, David Mosley, his father, leaving the hospital carrying a St. Anthony's property bag. In the early hours of March 31st, police received phone call records and location data for Passion's phone. The last ping showing for her phone was at Del Holmes Park in St. Petersburg at around 8:57 p.m. on March 29th. There were no further hits on her phone past this point. At 6 p.m. on the 31st, searches for Talon began at the Del Holmes Park. They used drones, dogs, as well as people searching on foot for him. During the search, a young man named Liddell Golden came up to an officer and changed the course of the investigation. He told them, "I don't know if I'm seeing things, but I think there is a baby in an alligator's mouth." Liddell took the officer to where he thought he had seen the alligator, in a small canal that connected Lake Magori to another, smaller lake. There, Officer Lance Chaya saw an alligator that had an object in its mouth. As he got closer to the alligator, he could clearly see the body of a small child. Officer Chaya passed this information over the radio, at which point officers and agents from multiple outfits swarmed the location. A single shot was fired to kill the alligator, which caused it to drop the child. Then, Officer Dustin Webster positively identified the dead toddler as Talon Mosley. The child had several minor wounds from the alligator's teeth, and his left arm had been torn completely from his body. The autopsy report later showed that Talon had been drowned. Do we know for sure if it's? I think so. It's starting to. If media's coming, I'm assuming it is. They said they saw something in the mouth of the gator, so that's a little bit of a body. They said the gator was down, so that night, police executed a warrant for the Mosley household. They recovered video footage from the security system, security cameras themselves, multiple cell phones, and they confiscated a set of Gucci slides with possible blood on them. Thomas Mosley was arrested on March 31st at 10 p.m. on 2 counts of murder in the first degree for Passion Jeffrey and his son Taylor Mosley. He was appointed a public defender and held at no bond. The trial has been delayed, so far due to the mental health issues exhibited by Mr. Mosley. He was found incompetent to stand trial on the 1st of August, 2024. There are some questions between the experts about whether he is actually suffering from mental health issues, specifically major depression, or if he is malingering, otherwise simply known as faking his illness. For the moment, Thomas is being held at the Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee. The next scheduled court hearing is set for August 1st, 2025. Since he has not gone to trial yet, Thomas is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Soon after Taylor was reported missing, his family started a GoFundMe to raise funds for the search, but unfortunately was converted to a fund for funeral costs for Taylor and Passion. Passion's mother and her great-aunt Theodosia Brickhouse thanked the many donors and well-wishers who helped them through this difficult time. The fundraiser collected $47,782 of its $50,000 goal. In preparation for the memorial services, Passion's family ran into an issue with the release of Taylor's body. Thomas Mosley, as the father of Taylor, was the person to whom the body needed to be released, even though he was the accused. We saw this same situation happen during our coverage of the Ethan Belcher case in Detroit. Ethan was left to decay in the county morgue as his mother was in police custody, and his biological father stopped communicating with his family and the authorities. Taylor's family and local activists advocated for new legislation. In April of 2024, a law passed to allow a different next of kin in situations involving criminal acts. Passion Jeffrey and Taylor Mosley received a homegoing ceremony on Friday, April 7th at the First Baptist Church of St. Petersburg. It was a moving ceremony focused on their lives and the unfairness of them leaving so soon. They were laid to rest together at the Woodlawn Memory Gardens. Case 5. Skylar Rose Gardner was born in early September of 2022. She had a brother who was only 1 year older than her, and 3 half-siblings, the eldest of which was already an adult when she was born. Her mother, Chantel, announced Skylar's birth to the world on an Instagram post on September 8, 2022. It was accompanied with a song, Free Mind by Thames. She captioned it, "God gave me something I never knew I needed. She brings peace to my crazy world." It was accompanied with a hashtag, premature awareness, indicating Skylar was born early. Chantel admitted she felt closer to her older son than to Skylar. She described Skylar as an independent baby and toddler. Maybe it was a trait ingrained early in Skylar's short life. Chantel didn't spend much time with Skylar in the PICU since her son was only a year old when his sister was born and needed a caretaker. Chantel Monet Boy was born on November 23, 1991, which makes her 33 years old as of the date of this recording. She worked as an insurance collector for the company Rehab Medical. Her position was remote, but on days she needed to work in person, she had family or friends watch her children. Chantel had aspirations of being a rap artist, going under the names Chantel Monet, Shunny B, and Shunny B Music. She promoted herself on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and released her songs on Spotify and Apple Music. She even had some live performances at small venues and music festivals. Prior to 2025, Chantel had 12 charges in the state of Indiana. All of them were traffic violations. Her Indiana criminal records show between 2010 and 2019 that she'd lived in at least 4 different residences, or at least had them as her mailing address. She also may have lived in Atlanta, Georgia for a short time, as indicated from her Facebook profile and a public background check service. Chantel got married in July of 2017 and took her husband's last name, Gardner, as her own. Her husband had 3 older children from a previous relationship, one of which was named godfather to his oldest child with Chantel. This would be the little boy that was born in September of 2021. The following year, they had Skylar. However, their relationship didn't work out, and soon after she was born, Skylar's parents filed for divorce. Chantel met Brian Thomas from networking in the music scene, and the two began dating. He also wanted to be a recording artist and branded himself under the names Beastie or Beastie Armstrong. A police affidavit with Chantel's statement implies that they were an item while the divorce process was ongoing. Like Chantel, Brian had numerous traffic violations on his criminal record, the earliest from 2005, when he would have been just 19 years old. But he also had charges for possession of weed, animal cruelty, and domestic battery. He was found guilty for the possession charges, but animal cruelty and domestic battery were dismissed. You heard that correctly. The state of Indiana cares more about smoking a plant than it does the safety of humans and animals. This is why I hate people. Now, unlike Chantel, he did serve jail time for some of his charges. Chantel lived in the Timber Point Apartments on Newberry Road. By the time this case made headlines, the apartment was disgusting. There's simply no nice way to put this. Overturned furniture, trash, dirty laundry, toys, and human waste made the apartment look like an episode of A&E's Hoarders. One can only imagine a strong, eye-watering, nauseating odor. Though it wasn't always like this. Chantel said her living space used to be kept up. Not pristine, she had 2 young children after all, but it was enough that she wasn't embarrassed to have guests over. Her apartment was the primary meetup spot for her and Brian. It was convenient since she could still be there if her kids needed her. When her divorce was finalized on August 2nd, Chantel was living in Indianapolis while the children's father lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her now ex-husband was disabled, so he gave Chantel full custody of the kids. He did not think he could provide or care for the children the way they needed and deserved. He had tried multiple times to visit Skylar and her brother, or at least speak to them over the phone, until made excuses or ignored him entirely. Though Chantel's ex-husband couldn't travel to see his children as often as he wanted to, his older children could. The final time they saw Skylar, they told their father that she and her brother smelled like urine. A close friend said Chantel developed postpartum depression after Skylar's birth, which only worsened with the stress of her divorce. Chantel alleged that in July of 2024, she contacted her ex-husband. She was so overwhelmed that she asked him to care for the children. She even offered to send him money, but he did not take her up on the offer. One day, she stopped picking up after herself and her children. Between July and August of 2024, the mess became too much for Chantel to handle, so she stopped trying altogether. This extended to her children's daily needs. As the days went on, she gave them fewer baths, diaper changes, and meals. Chantel said she began leaving her children unattended as early as October of 2024. She said the first times were when she met with Brian Thomas in the apartment parking lot. She could spend alone time with him and regularly check on the children. Brian asked where Skylar and her brother were during these meetings, and it's unclear if he knew they were unsupervised at this time, or if he thought there was a responsible, trusted adult in the apartment with them. Chantel's son, who is autistic, had a habit of smearing his own excrement on the walls, and she stopped caring enough to clean up after him. Gradually, it accumulated until the smell filled the apartment. Chantel was under the impression that what her son was doing was normal, that he was cleaning up after himself in his dirty diapers the only way he knew how to. Of course, a visit to the doctor, even a minute on Google, would tell her that this is not normal. Scatolia, the medical term for this behavior, is rooted in sensory, medical, behavioral, or psychological issues. At best, he knew it would get his mother's attention as he couldn't speak, and at worst, he was in pain or extreme discomfort. Either way, Chantel did not answer her son's clear call for help. Chantel soon made quick trips to the or to pick up takeout while leaving her children home alone. In her mind, she would be back at home soon enough. She claimed her children could be difficult, and she would rather avoid public tantrums if she could. Chantel wasn't in denial that her apartment was disgusting. She knew, and one day she decided she just couldn't take it anymore. The obvious solutions would be to either clean it out by herself or with help, or to relocate altogether. She chose the second option, but she didn't think that she should bring her children with her. She could be gone for hours, even a day or two, before returning to check up on them. She turned on YouTube to keep them entertained. The children particularly loved the channel Ms. Rachel. She basically treated them more like houseplants instead of the vulnerable children that they were. Chantel visited the apartment inconsistently to drop off food for her children, and would clean them once a week or less. Skylar was said to have human waste caked into her hair, and Chantel would clean her daughter off in the apartment's shower. Skylar also constantly had severe diaper rash, and possibly even an infection, because she wasn't changed often as she should have been. Soon, Chantel realized she couldn't leave her children with family and friends, or take them to the doctor. Someone would see their mistreatment, and she would be ousted as a bad mother. She didn't even get her furnace repaired when it broke down, since the apartment maintenance team would see what had become of the living space. Instead, borrowed a space heater from a coworker, and she figured that would solve that problem. She planned her visits home when she was expecting phone calls from family. She knew they would ask to speak with her children. She was ready to honor their request, but would never plan in-person visits. By all accounts, Chantel was well aware enough to know that she would get in trouble, but it was not enough for her to fix her mistakes before it was too late. It seemed she was more worried about herself getting caught than the welfare of her own children. While Skylar and her brother were hungry, cold, and stewing in dirty diapers, Chantel began to routinely spend the night at Brian's apartment. Brian's brother, who lived with him, estimates that Chantel visited 3 to 5 days every week. He knew Chantel had children, but he only saw them a total of 3 times. The final time was when they visited the apartment in December, celebrating Brian's 39th birthday. He said the children seemed fine. He did note that their feet had a red discoloration. Now on January 25, 2025, Chantel's friend known only as LA invited the family to join hers for a day of fun at Chuck E. Cheese. LA was one of Chantel's go-to-sitters before she left the kids completely unattended, but she hadn't seen the children in person since Halloween. Chantel didn't give much of an answer to LA's invitation. In the evening, Chantel arrived at the apartment with food. Only this time, she would be faced with the consequences of her neglect. Chantel entered her apartment at 6:30 p.m., intending to give her children their dinner, or so she said. Her son came when she called, but Skylar did not respond. Chantel searched the apartment for her daughter, only to make a grim discovery. Chantel found Skylar underneath the dresser. She was in a state of rigor mortis, the stiffening of muscles after death, which can start 2 hours after a person passes away and last up to 2 days. She was covered in bruises, frostbite, and bite marks. One of these bite marks is theorized to be from a rat gnawing at the 2-year-old's body, but Chantel didn't call emergency services right away. First, she changed Skylar out of her dirty shirt and called Brian. She later told police she didn't want to call him, not from the shame of being a neglectful mother, but the shame of her disgusting apartment. Brian answered her call. He came to the apartment, but waited in the apartment common area. Chantel finally called 911. Police and firefighters arrived within minutes. The moment Detective Caitlin Harris entered the apartment, she was hit with a strong, repulsive stench. She couldn't even see the floor as they navigated the residence. An affidavit described the environment in detail, and I quote, "Upon entry into the apartment, Detective Caitlin Harris was hit with an overwhelming smell of feces. The apartment floors were covered in human feces, garbage, chicken bones, fast food bags, open barbecue sauce containers, clothing, toys, other debris, knocked over furniture, and household items. The floors were littered with the above items, and more to the point, Detective Harris and crime lab technician Blakely Watson had no choice but to step on the items as they were walking through. Multiple areas of the walls were covered in feces, what appeared to be barbecue sauce and other unknown substances, including a baby crib and mattress that had feces layered on them. Inside of the apartment was also cold, reported to be between 46 to 51 degrees Fahrenheit. The accumulation of spoiled food, trash, sharp objects, and human waste was so bad that investigators would later determine the apartment to be a biohazard. While the scene seemed to suggest that Skylar was crushed underneath a dresser, investigators were doubtful that truly happened to her. Now, Skylar was small, but the dresser was remarkably light. They did not think the dresser alone killed Skylar. Their suspicions only grew after Skylar's brother was examined at Riley Children's Hospital. Medical professionals said he had many overall signs that he was severely neglected. It's reported that Skylar's brother was possessive of the hospital food that he was served. He devoured it desperately and had a strong emotional reaction when someone tried to take away his plate. He ate so fast that nurses stepped in to get him to slow down. His stomach was distended from being so constipated, and his feet were swollen. He also had scars from hyperpigmentation. When Skylar's father was told that his 2-year-old daughter was no longer in this world, he crossed state lines that day to help the detectives. He told them he hadn't seen his children in person since Thanksgiving of 2024. He tried to speak with them on the phone through video calls, but Chantel only let them speak once. The last time Skylar's father spoke with her, she was cuddled up on her mother's chest, drifting to sleep. Skylar was one of 4 Indianapolis children who died in January of 2025. One of these children, a 3-year-old named Asher Robinson, passed away on January 25th, the same day that Skylar did. He was pronounced dead at Riley Children's Hospital, the same hospital Skylar's brother was taken to for evaluation. The similarities are striking. A probable cause affidavit was signed by Detective Caitlin Harris on January 30th. It details the night police were called to Chantel's apartment and the following few days of investigation. With this, we can build a timeline of events after Skylar's passing. Chantel was brought in for questioning the same night Skylar died. She gave some necessary background information, including what she did for work. She worked remotely, but when she needed to go to work in person, Brian or LA cared for Skylar and her brother. Detective Harris noted in the affidavit that Chantel's timeline changed throughout the questioning. Chantel eventually settled on a series of events, which was recounted in the affidavit. I quote, Chantel said that since December 9th, LA had only watched the children 3 times. She said her son needed a haircut, so she took him to Brian's residence where she dropped him off. Once home, she became anxious and needed a break, so she took Skylar inside and returned outside to sit in her car. She said she went back inside and began looking for Skylar,